Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the council meeting for the 26th of April 2023. Could we please start our meeting with Karakia, which is in front of you, and ask that we recite this together would be good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome again. Welcome to staff. Welcome to those that may be watching us online, and also the chair, acknowledging the chair of the Foxton, Te Awaho Foxton Community Board, which we will have. We will be bringing the proceedings of committees to the first item in our report section of the agenda. Firstly, we have no apologies. Thank you all for your attendance today. Public participation, we have none, and shows the benefit of having the forum already. Late items, we have none either. Any councillors have any declarations of interest?
I'll just declare in the matter of C2 regarding C2.
Okay, thank you. Just to note that the item C2 is the contract regarding our parks and reserves. Thank you. No one else? Cool, thank you. Okay, so just confirmation of the minutes of 15th of March, in committee meeting of council 15th of March, the extraordinary meeting of council 22nd of March, and the meeting minutes in committee extraordinary meeting of council 22nd of March, that these be accepted as a true and correct record. Have a second for that, please. Councillor Tamihana, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So, as is indicated, we are now moving to 9.1, which is the proceedings of the Te Awaho Foxton Community Board. John, welcome to the table. While you're doing that, can I just move 2.1, 2.2, that the community board proceedings be received? Seconded by Deputy Mayor Allen. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Welcome, John. Is there anything you wish to add to the minutes or the proceedings of that meeting?
I would like to make a few comments, if I may.
Certainly.
Your Worship. Your Worship, Mr Mayor and elected councillors, thank you for the opportunity to address you. On perusing the agenda for this meeting, I noticed the report from the chair of the Te Awaho Foxton Community Board was omitted. Hopefully that was a simple error, not a subtle message. The board is very much aware of the upcoming deadline for submissions for the LTP. Unfortunately, some of us respond very well to deadlines, and we look forward to submitting on the 1st of May our submissions from the Community Board. We talked about the idea of more business breakfasts for Foxton and Foxton Beach business folk. I'm happy to report that we have one scheduled for 7:30 on the Thursday the 4th of May. It's organised jointly by the Horowhenua Company, HDC and Te Awaho Foxton Community Board. Of course, Your Worship and councillors, you are cordially invited to attend. Publicity is underway. Direct invitations are being sent out to the attendees at the first meeting, and it's already on at least five Facebook pages to my knowledge. We are keen to be on being involved in bringing all our Foxton and Foxton Beach groups together. And to this end, the Salvation Army Community Ministries held a community information meeting on the 21st of March, where community members were addressed by representatives of the New Zealand Police, the Foxton Beach Community Centre and Health Shuttle, the Raukawa Whanau Ora, the New Zealand Cancer Society, Te Awaho Foxton Community Board, Personal Money Coaches, Save Our River Trust, the Foxton Flag Stripping Museum, and the Te Awaha Masonic Lodge. We will be working with the Salvation Army Community Ministries to spread the net further, with regular meetings organised by non-government organisations, building the groups together in Foxton, getting to work together. Te Awaha Foxton Community Board are not happy with what is not happening regarding the Foxton East drainage scheme. The massive lack of flood protection for our area, we are very unhappy about it, and we will be taking that up with Horizons as well, because it's a very important factor for our town. We do not even have a 50-year flood protection. We've had conversations with the New Zealand Police. They've been very fruitful, and we expect to be addressed by both our local Sergeant Bernie O'Brien and by Sergeant AJ Dyerson, who is the EB Liaison Officer for our next board meeting. We've arranged that, and that's quite good. It's gratifying to be involved in the resurrection of the Foxton Futures Governance Group. That's good to see, and this time let's just say it's pleasing that Foxton has an important future as the second largest urban area in the Horowhenua. We have a great deal of work to do. As chair of the FCB, I attended a meeting of the Manawatu Estuary Management Team last week, and this included the Department of Conservation, Horizons Regional Council, HTC, the Manawatu Estuary Trust, and others. These groups are finally actively concerned about our area of international significance, the Ramsar site. And perhaps the council would like to learn more about the Ramsar site and would be happy to arrange someone to talk to you about that. It has been decided to seek Iwi input for our next meeting, so forward consensual planning can commence. The Anzac Day services yesterday were very successful, very well attended. The 21st Supply Company from Linton supported as usual. Public participation at both the Dawn Parade and the civic ceremony were excellent. And council staff to be commended for their preparation of TANs, and Jim and Sarah Harper, of course, for their providing of the sound system at the cenotaph. Pupils of the Manawatu College and all three primary schools all performed very well, and we extend our sincere thanks to them. And we wish to see the Foxton area, the jewel of the Horowhenua, grow economically, socially, ecologically and exponentially, and seek full HDC support for this. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I'm not sure what happened with the report, but we will no doubt note that and make sure that it is included in the future. Any questions for Deputy Mayor Allen?
Not so much a question as a comment, Mr. Chair. On page 199 of the audit paper, the minutes record that the community board identified 2 members of the board to take part at governance level on the Foxton East drainage scheme. That was in response to an invitation to the 2 Horizons councillors when they presented at the previous meeting of the board. The question was asked of them, would they be happy to have representation from the community board at governance level for the working party around the East drainage scheme. So I just wanted to note that, and also just maybe to identify, I think is council represented at governance level currently on that working party? If that is not the case, I think perhaps we could give consideration to that, not something for the spur of the moment now, but I think it would make sense to have representation at both levels on that working party. Reason being, I speak in support of the deep concern the board does have about the redesign of the Eastern Australian scheme.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to confirm, there is currently no governance group in place. Off the back of the most recent decision of Horizons Regional Council, a decision was made to establish a governance group though. What we haven't received though is formal communication from Horizons to establish that governance group, but off the back of the Foxton Community Board's decision to appoint community board members, I will write to Michael McCartney, their Chief Executive, confirming who will be representing the Te Awaha Foxton Community Board, but also seeking, I suppose, more information from them around how they intend to establish the governance group. I think of concern should be the pace of this process, but there is a working group, and currently council is represented on that working group by officers, but not at an elected member level.
Councillor Brown.
just following on from that, and this to Deputy Mayor Allen or Mr. Gurley, and this refers to, the resolution here refers to Horizon Regional Council Working Party regarding the Taylor Street pump. It has nothing to do with the Fox East Drainage Scheme. Is that a mistake, or is that?
That is an error. Yes, that's a misprint. Yeah.
Fox East Drainage Scheme, not Taylor Street pump. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, moving to 9.2, which is the proceedings of the Community Wellbeing Committee from the 5th of April. Just move 2.1 and 2.2. Seconded, Councillor Boyle. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Any questions relating to those minutes? Okay, so moving back to item 6.1, which is the mayoral report. I'll move 2.1, 2.2 that this be received, seconded by Councillor Brannigan. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So the first item of recommendation is the Council authorises the Mayor, Councillors Horowhenua and Young to attend the Local Government New Zealand Conference to be held in Christchurch in July 2023, and that Council nominates Councillors Horowhenua and Young as the alternates to exercise Council's voting rights should the presiding delegate not be in attendance at the 2023 Annual General Meeting of Local Government New Zealand. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Tukapua. Did you have a question or no? Second? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Excellent that we have two new incoming councillors attending that conference, and I'm sure they will get much benefit from it. So now moving to 2.5. The Council District, the Horowhenua District Council endorses a rates rebates remit to be submitted to the LGNZ Zone 3 meeting for its consideration, noting that that Zone 3 meeting is tomorrow and Friday. That the remit reads, LGNZ works with central government too, and number one should start with the word raise rather than lower. Lower the income, raise the income threshold for rates rebates eligibility to enable more low and fixed income property owners across access to the rebate. 2, investigate options to make rates rebates more accessible for residents by implementing an income data sharing process similar to that of Horowhenua District Council and Levin MSD office. This will enable councils to obtain benefit income on behalf of the ratepayer and to make it easier to apply for the rates rebate. And 3, investigate options for data sharing between councils and Internal Affairs and Ministry of Social Development to proactively identify households that qualify for a rates rebate rather than waiting for people to apply. Councillor Jennings.
Happy to move that.
Happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Young, thank you. Any debate or discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just wanted to speak very briefly to this, just to thank staff for preparing at pace the remit and supporting information. And I think it's important just to flag our view of the solution and just to give some reassurance to the community around how we see this working. And so officers have confirmed that the way in which the current, the way that this would operate is that we would be essentially taking the rating database information, which is already publicly available information, and providing that to MSD. They would then match that information with information they already hold, and then they would play a really important role in communicating with those people who are eligible for the rebate, and then hopefully there's some further discussion in the MSD and central government space around what that solution actually looks like in terms of the automation or digitalisation of that process. But look, I think this is a really important thing for us to be championing. I think we've heard in the past that there's around about $1 million that potentially this community loses out on every year because people aren't fully accessing the rebate. So I certainly think this is something that we should be championing, and taking it to the LGNZ conference, I think, is a good place to start.
Thank you. Look, just noting that this is the first step in the process as well. There are a number of processes that need to go before it actually gets to the local government conference to be actually put to the members. So if we endorse this remit today, then over the next 2 days gets endorsed by Zone 3. It will then go to local government to assess whether they believe that there is sufficient sort of weight to the issue to be put forward at the conference. Noting that a similar remit was proposed in 2020 by the Wanganui District Council along the same lines, but very little has happened. We've been in touch with Wanganui, and they're happy for us to actually have the matter, if you like, reintroduced, and so is local government. We've talked to them as well. So we think that will gain some traction along the process. The Chief Executive just has pointed out to me that in number 2, where we talk about enabling council to obtain benefit income on behalf of the ratepayer, we're actually wishing to change that word to information rather than income, just to, I suppose, allay any fears that we're invading people's privacy in terms of that information.
As the mover, and hopefully with the agreement of the seconder, happy to make that change.
Thank you. Cool. In that case, any further discussion or debate? Councillor Ori-Te-Pa.
Just wanting to double check, we've got in there about live-in MSD office. There's also an office in Foxton, so it would be Horowhenua MSD.
Sorry, so just noting we'll change that to Horowhenua Ministry of Social Development offices. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, moving to the rest of the mayoral report. The only other item there probably that needs some consideration is the 3 waters reforms, and I'm just going to ask the Chief Executive if she would possibly give us an update from what is included in the agenda around any movement that's been made as a entity, or what are the next steps?
Through you, Your Worship. So it's fair to say that right at this moment, information continues to be fairly light from the National Transition Unit on the impact of the reset announcement and what that will mean for us in terms of both the transition program, but also what it means for us here at Horowhenua District Council, and most importantly, our ratepayers. It really does feel like a next step is for council to have a conversation once we have more information, so that council can determine and reconfirm its position on 3 waters reform. Obviously, the reset announcement does change the parameters to some extent, and council will need to give consideration as to whether that changes your perspective on what that means for our advocacy position. But B, most importantly, the impact that will have on our long-term planning, and certainly off the back of the announcement, I think we can all be comforted that we might have that adverse audit opinion, but we have an adverse audit opinion that delivers the information that we need, given the enormous uncertainty around 3 waters reform. The NWLAS, so the councils in the Horizons region, some years ago did some work on trying to understand what an option might be for a council-controlled organisation for 3 waters. That work it's a little bit old now, but the chief executives have started a conversation about how we can pick that work up, A, share it with our elected members, but B, start to understand what some of the risks and opportunities exist within that, given that a lot of that work was not under a Three Waters reform banner, it was under councils trying to think differently about how they might deliver services. I think it would be fair to say that we're not in a position to give you really sound advice right now about the impacts of this reset on our organisation, but also our community. We need to wait for more information. But certainly what's front of mind for me is the significant impact this has on our people, because it has dragged out the uncertainty that already existed. And for those of our people that may have been excited about the prospect of Three Waters reform, that scale doesn't exist in the same way it used to exist. And so I'm really mindful of what this means for our people, retention of our people, but the very real expectation from the National Transition Unit that we continue to work through our transition program, which of course elected members are becoming pretty familiar with off the back of the Three Waters task force work which you've commenced in the last few weeks. So not happy to answer questions, Your Worship, but what's in the public is essentially what we have as a council right now.
And just reiterating that information I gave you on Friday in terms of the C4LD approach, and also local government New Zealand being a little mystified around the removal of tranche 2 of the Better Off funding, and trying to understand where that sits, and they're seeking some meetings with the government to try and understand what will happen in the future in that. So, as the Chief Executive has indicated, we do need some time to understand some of the issues that are in front of us in terms of Three Waters, and then to reconfirm, do we still remain as part of C4LD, or do we, what is going to be our position? So there is some further discussions to be had, because the joining of C4LD was the last council. We need to continue to ensure that everybody is comfortable with that position, and so the discussion will be had at some stage. Councillor Brooker.
Just looking at the statement that the establishment date for these entities will be staggered over time. Are we going to maintain our existing work program and looking at our program on transition of properties and things like that? Are we sticking with those dates as well?
Through Your Worship, so that transition program is ultimately dictated by the National Transition Unit, who are empowered through the Water Entities Act. So until the legislation is changed, which we've heard from Minister McAnulty, he intends to have through the House prior to the election, which would mean it would need to take place pre-July to get that political clearance. The expectation is we still operate under the current Water Services Entities Act. So things like the asset transfer, the expectation is that we work on the basis it's happening. I think the staggering of the timeframes, obviously we need more information from the National Transition Unit on what their expectation would be in terms of timeframe for the Horizons region. We also need to, certainly one of the questions I have is, what does this mean for the 2024 long-term plan? Because the uncertainty around timeframes, in my view, as a sector, we should be lobbying or advocating for some exemption around long-term plans, because it's going to be very, very difficult to do a 2024 long-term plan. We've just experienced it, right, with the long-term plan amendment, where we're not quite sure whether it starts 124, 125, 126. So I don't necessarily have the answers to your questions. At the moment, we have to take the guidance from the National Transition Unit because it's legislated.
Sorry, can I ask another question? I suppose I didn't word my question properly. It would be important that the last workshop we had, there was a lot of debate over how rushed we were moving through the process. So rather than being rushed next time, I think it would be wise to continue with the same process now. and make sure that we are prepared when it does happen.
Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this process has been a shambles from beginning to end. And actually, I was really obviously watched with interest, like other councillors, around the reset announcement. And for me, the key issue is around this better off second tranche of funding, because that is another broken promise. The first broken promise was the opt-in, opt-out part of the policy, and now this is a really fundamental piece of the policy, was the bribe or the sweetener that was the better off funding, and now that's off the table. And so I think, thankfully, as I understand it, our long-term plan 2021 to 2041 doesn't rely on that. We haven't put that number in there because of, I guess, the prudent decisions at the time that we couldn't rely on the certainty of the policy. So thankfully, that was a step that was taken. But I think it's really important that we do communicate with our community about the uncertainty and the issues that we are facing as a council because of the continuation of, I guess, changing goalposts and that lack of uncertainty and that lack of detail that we need to do our business as usual activities in terms of long-term planning and all that kind of thing. And so whether that's through C4LD or whether that's on our own initiative, I think we really, really need to make the community clear, or give the community the information that makes it clear that this is not us that is creating this uncertainty. This is central government, and I think it's really, really crucial that we have that ongoing information and ongoing dialogue with our community in the lead up to the long-term plan, because this uncertainty is going to be really, really problematic for us.
So there was no question there. There was a political statement that.
I guess the question is. I just want to confirm my understanding that with the second tranche of better off funding, that we haven't relied upon that. We haven't forecasted that as part of our assumptions or any of our long-term funding plans, because that seems to be one of the key issues that other councils are facing.
Through your worship, that's correct, Councillor Jennings. We have not relied on it. The comment I would make, though, is that some of those projects that we agreed to in tranche 1 were done on the basis that there would be tranche 2. So the project I would use as an example is the Live-In Town Centre transformation, where we've allocated $2 million from tranche 1 with the intention that a significant amount of tranche 2 would go towards that project as well. Stepping back from the actual projects, I think what we can expect is the sector, and council will obviously need to consider its position on this, to do some work around the point of the better off funding was to support councils as they transitioned from no longer being responsible for three waters as they looked down what I like to call a bright tunnel around the future for local government. And so without the better off funding, we actually start to question, where does the Future for Local Government report fit into this? And as you start to think about the broader affordability issues that we're facing going into the 2024 long-term plan, what does it mean we're going to need to do in terms of the trade-offs we're going to have to make around our investment decisions, or the support of transitioning this organisation into whatever we will look like come either 1 July 2024, 25 or 26.
Councillor Branning.
So I do have a question, Mr Mayor, and it's around the role or the position of Local Government New Zealand. I take it, reading your report, that they are now seeking further information. Councillors will be aware that there's been a lot of commentary in certain local government circles that the position of Local Government New Zealand perhaps got themselves into in terms of their partnership with these government reforms that probably haven't worked out as they intended. So do I then take it then that, a question you may or may not be answered, it's probably more of a statement, that they are now being kept at arm's length as well, because they are in a position of seeking more information, which from a local council, local representative point of view, causes some alarm. I'd have thought they would be joined at the hip and would have all the information we need. So,
Look, I hope there will be some clarity given to us at Zone 3 over the next couple of days in terms of that. The Minister is attending, along with the Chief Executive of Local Government New Zealand and the President. So there will be ample opportunity to discuss some of these issues and hopefully get some clarity around where we're going. So, hopefully by the weekend I'll be in a better position to answer some of those questions that you've got. And
you'll provide us with some.
Yeah, I'll provide you with some.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Tukupu.
I note that you're saying you can't provide us any guidance yet. There's still more information to be shared from NTU. And my question, so we have 16 regional councils, there's 10 entities proposed in this new reset, and effectively we sit on the border of, I guess, our MWLAS grouping, and potentially, should we submit and ask, or better understand, I guess is where I'm going with this, we could go south. But I want to know that Horowhenua is better off going south based on what the other councils are needing in their long-term plans, like sort of the state of their infrastructure, what upgrades. I know across the country we all need to do a lot more, but actually in reality I'd like to understand the facts, and because I know that going south are wealthier. So if we're talking about cross-subsidisation, potentially, but hey, maybe I'm just, well, if you look at some stats, you know that the biggest earners in the country are in Wellington. We're about to connect with O2NL and have that far better movement across, that connectivity to Wellington. So Kapiti region, yep, they're more wealthier than the Horowhenua. And I'm not saying that Palmerston North, but I would like somehow to understand a bit of is Horowhenua better off in that grouping or this grouping, and then we at the right time submit on that basis. And look, it's democracy rules, so I'm just asking the question. And at what stage can that information be provided?
Through you, Your Worship. So the first thing I'd say is that what we need to establish is an understanding via the National Transition Unit whether there is any flexibility in the 10-entity model for councils to potentially shift or move. Once we've established that, what we can quite easily do, because there has been lots of analysis on options through DIA, and I'm hoping that they'll be pretty willing to share some of that information, is do some of that cost-benefit analysis around Horowhenua within a Horizons context or Horowhenua within a Wellington context. I anticipate that there are some other councils in other parts of the motto that are considering what would it look like if they went south or north as well. So we can certainly provide that advice, and that's a really good example of the sort of advice we need to come back to the council table with, so that not only can you reconfirm your position on Three Waters reform, but also give me direction on how we best advocate, A, with central government, but B, continue to do the work that we're legislatively required to do under the Water Services Entities Act.
Yeah. And so I'd only say, I only ask because we're on the border of the, we're not stuck in the middle, and there's obviously no possibility of that. But actually there is, in this situation where we sit, but we're already, and not just this year but last year, we're now included in Wellington's regional spatial planning. We're doing a lot of meetings together. Like, we're included in that space, so it's just a possibility.
Along with a number of considerations that we're going to have to make. Anyway, let's move on. We know that we've got a lot of work in front of us, regardless of what the reset looks like, and hopefully, as I said, in the next couple of days we'll get a bit more clarity. All right, so let's move now to our 7.1, which is the regulatory compliance strategy adoption. And Vi is coming to the table, and whilst you're doing that, can I move 3.1 and 3.2 that the report be received? Seconded by Councillor Jennings. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Welcome, Vi.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. So I'm here this afternoon to present the compliance strategy for adoption. The strategy sets out our organisation's high-level approach to regulatory compliance activities carried out by the compliance team. I just have a couple of points to note. Though it's written for the compliance team, which is the team that I lead here at Council, the key components or the key elements, the principles and the enforcement model can actually be applied across the entire organisation. Our team deal with the majority of compliance and enforcement related tasks, and we do work really closely with other areas of the organisation who might have some compliance and enforcement requirements, and would certainly provide advice to them based on what is within the strategy and the tasks and actions that we carry out. The second thing you will have seen in the strategy itself, it has another couple of components. So it's got the enforcement response guidelines, which is guidance for staff about how to practically apply the strategy in their everyday tasks. Within that, there are factors for consideration, and there is some commentary in there, but it's I suppose just to highlight a couple of things in that, it does take some expertise and experience to work out what factors and to what extent you take that into consideration, and what's not really highlighted in there is ensuring that we've got a cultural lens across the activities that we do as well. So when we are taking factors into consideration, that we are looking at not only the persons or the member of the public's participation in that, but also ours. So where there might be some actions that our staff take that could, unintentionally aggravate it, is making sure that we've got some oversight into how our actions can potentially aggravate situations as well. And then just lastly in there, you'll see that there's also some prosecution or a prosecution policy in there as well. So that's that highest point in the pyramid, so making sure that we are accountable for the decisions we make and that they are fair, reasonable and we're consistent in that. So we've included that in there as well, rather than trying to wrap it all up in policy. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Vi, are you indicating that there will be some changes then to the appendices that we've got attached, or some extra bits added?
Yes, I do anticipate that what we'll do is just add a bit around when we're looking at extent of harm and conduct. There's just some words in there around ensuring we've got a cultural lens across the work that we're doing as well. So it would be something along the lines of, so in here we've got conduct as in the context means the behaviours, intent and capability of the persons, organisations whose actions are being considered, and the actions and the intent and actions of the staff who are carrying out the role. So it's not just about the focus on the community's actions, but actually also about the focus of our actions as well.
Any questions for Vi there? Councillor Tupper.
Okay, so I appreciate that. It is needed. Obviously, a recent incident highlights that, which has occurred beyond the 1 hour briefing we had on this particular topic. And I note, look, Council Mark said we didn't have one, so we should have one, and you've done one, and first cuts really, it is good. But there are elements in this that I'm concerned about. And when we put in our approach around tangata whenua and iwi, have they had an input or an understanding that these considerations are adequate? And I get that there's learnings to be had, but I guess for me, I guess what's arisen recently, I wasn't cognizant of during our briefing, and I guess we didn't. I think around the table, we need to take responsibility that perhaps we didn't seek out further examples to really understand the impact on the ground and how this affects our customers. Because we kind of were leaning towards, dog attacks or, animal control, those kinds of examples. But things like complaints where you have to enter into someone's property and we perhaps communicate with this person, not with that person, and there ends up being a clash of sorts. We find ourselves in unintended situations or consequences that poses real risks, risks that could turn really bad. And without saying too much, I was thinking about testing a scenario, just one I thought up, and see what the response might be, but I'm not sure if this is the right place for that, or you're okay, or because the alternate is I request a pause for one meeting and we hold this over so that we can have a bit more of a discussion and then adopt this. So how would you like me to approach this?
Why do you want to respond to that?
Thanks, Councillor Tukapoa. So I think maybe just taking a step back a wee bit, this strategy is the high-level strategy, so it's about setting a consistent way or approach for how we deliver compliance and enforcement activities. Within it are the compliance response guidelines, so those are the guidelines around how staff might act and where we might do certain things. Within the document, it talks about acting, fair, reasonable, but also within the law. Within the law provides us with a scale of where we can and can't. So this is how we could go in and say we have the authority to do that. The legislation supports us to be able to go in there and to go onto land without a person's permission, for example. But we don't do that. What we do is take into account all of these factors for consideration, such as the extent of the harm and, as I mentioned before, the conduct not just of us but of the customer as well. I think what I'm trying to say is that I believe it's covered within the strategy that's there at the moment. But if it's about providing some more support to council to feel an extra level of comfort around what's in there, I'm more than happy to do that. And one of the possible resolutions for today is to park it, come back later on, as long, but I would ask for some support from council around the guidance of where you think those changes might be needed, so that we can go and make those changes and present it back here.
Yeah, I'll just, have you got a question for Vi? Have you? Yeah, so by my understanding is that the policy is just formalising what, in theory, the approach that's already being taken in council. So when we think about a policy, this is how our council officers are currently responding to. When I read the policy, there's nothing in here that I have an allergic reaction to, using Monique's words. But I do wonder whether it would be benefit to get some additional eyes across it from the view of the independent members that sit within the Risk and Insurance Committee, to also have an opportunity to review the document and potentially give them an opportunity to provide some feedback that might give you the guidance that you're looking for. And I just wonder whether that process might be more helpful, bearing in mind that that meeting will then coincide with probably the next council meeting.
Thanks. In terms of a way forward, we're only talking about the overarching strategy here. We're not talking about individual issues that we might be confronting at different times. That sits in behind the strategy, I assume. So, Councillor, I think there's a way forward is to adopt what we have in front of us today, recognising that we do have more work to do in terms of adding some further cultural significance to the document, understanding and what Councillor Tukapua has alluded to, not all councillors will be familiar with what she has referred to, and so there probably does need to be a bit more of an explanation and a further bit of work so that all councillors can understand what has been taken and why Councillor Tukapua is suggesting the way that could be. Or the other option is to put it back to the Risk and Insurance Committee and for them to do that follow-up work. But I think Vi's now seeking some guidance in terms of this strategy that's in front of you now, acknowledging that there is some further work to be done. How does that sit? Or lay it on the table and come back to the next meeting. Councillor Browning.
Listen, I've read the documents and I'm perfectly comfortable with them. I acknowledge comments from Councillor Tukapua, not knowing exact the incident of the matters she's talking about, but this is a reality that council have regulatory responsibilities and powers under certain statutes and acts. And if you liken it to some organisation like New Zealand Police, they have huge powers of entry and for very different reasons. For a wide range of reasons, but they practice those very carefully as our council officers do. So I'm very comfortable with it. If there needs to be some more commentary based on something that I don't know about, I'm happy to do that. But I'm certainly happy to accept the documents. I think they're good. They're what we need to do our job, or for council officers to do their job. If we need to have a session and a workshop to make sure everyone's comfortable with that, happy with that too. But I wouldn't want to cause too much more work and too much more delay before we accept them. So that's my position.
Deputy Mayor.
So I'm moving 4.2.
Of council is aware that 3.3 that council adopt the compliance strategy, including appendices, as attached in attachment A. But I wonder whether we could just add noting that further work needs to be done to complete those. Sorry.
Could you add the motion that it's adopted but still referred to the Risk and Insurance Committee for further review or direction?
So if we want a further recommendation, that would come, but let's just deal with this first one. Do I have a second for Councillor Allen's, Councillor Brannigan? So it's on the table. Any further discussion or debate? So, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so just briefly speaking to it, to me it's not either or. We can get this piece of work on the table, which is a high-arching strategy. That would not mean a review from anyone else because we've workshopped it. Where it sits at the moment, I think, is fine, but we absolutely acknowledge the points raised by Councillor Tukapua and others about the subsequent pieces of work. So I think it's about getting this piece of work on, adopting that, noting that there is further work to be done.
Councillor Branning.
Yeah, and I support that, but also acknowledge Councillor Grimstone's comments, but we're elected members to make decisions based on good information in front of us, and I just don't think this has got the complexity that we're making to get it on the table. So, but happy to make sure there's the follow-up conversations to address whatever issues that Councillor Tukapua has referred to.
Chief Executive just made a suggestion, Councillor Tukapua, that you work with officers to maybe further, on further things that sit in behind that strategy following this meeting.
I appreciate that, but I also take on Councillor Grimstone's point about having independence from risk, perhaps have a chance to, because I see that I've witnessed the value of their input, and I think it doesn't hurt to give them a chance. I think we'd be better off, actually. But yeah, we'll see what the table votes.
Councillor Jennings.
Sorry, just conscious we're in debate. So I obviously take the points of Deputy Mayor Allen and Councillor Brannigan. The thing that concerns me or makes me uneasy is that clearly Councillor Tukapua has a real life example where it's inappropriate to talk about the detail in public, but that real life example is giving her concerns about how this policy would actually apply in practice, and that there's clearly some concern there. So that sort of sits a little bit uneasy that we would be putting a policy in place when there's obviously an unresolved or something that's perhaps concerning around the content of what we're proposing to adopt. So I guess can I ask a question to the Chief Executive or to Vi around what's the harm in pausing momentarily in terms of laying on the table with a view to taking that discussion offline, understanding the nature of the concern, making some further tweaks if necessary, and then bringing it back to a further meeting, acknowledging that a procedural motion could be put during debate.
Through your worship, look, I think the only harm is that we want to get this done. It's obviously an outstanding recommendation from Council Mark for some time. Putting that to one side, though, if Council, albeit it would be a further conversation of Council, I'm not sure whether there's anything in the compliance strategy you want to remove. I think what you want to do is make additions to the compliance strategy that strengthens the assurances that you need as elected members that we're appropriately reflecting or representing any cultural values in our work. So either laying it on the table or adopting it with further work to then return to Council, I think either option is going to get us there, and ultimately that's a decision for you to make.
Councillor Tukapua.
Following that advice, my concerns are not just cultural.
Yeah, my 2 cents worth is my 2 cents are I actually support Councillor Tukapua and Councillor Grimstone's comments. So whatever additions are needed to be made to what we're debating here, then I would support. I think Councillor Tukapua is exactly right that we do have some lifetime experiences, and we do need to get some processes in place and ensure we're doing the right thing before the policy is completely adopted, or that we ensure that it's not just said we're going to review and amend later, that it's actually that it's adopted appropriately, and it gives a level of comfort, I think, to Councillor Tukapua and others of us that carry some of those same concerns. Kia ora.
Okay, so the recommendations on the table, I'll now put it to the vote. All those in favour? So can I have a show of hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Thank you, the motion's lost. Okay, so now in that case, the decision is to whether just to lay it on the table or to put it back to the Risk and Assurance Committee to follow up.
I'm not sure about the value of the Risk and Assurance Committee. I think we may be able to mitigate the issues that a few of us are seeing with this that have arisen post the workshop on it without going through that process. I'd like to put forward laying it on the table.
So recommendations laid on the table. Do we need a recommendation to do that?
Through your worship,
Yeah,
that would be helpful because
Okay.
I think without preempting kind of Councillor Boyle's intent, you don't just want to lay it on the table. You want an additional workshop in order for some further work to bring it back to council.
Yes. Right.
My view would be that the item was laid on the table, that we had a discussion about the incident that's arisen post our last workshop that's highlighted some inconsistencies, and that the document were reviewed to encompass a number of things which I'm willing to go into detail of if need be. But
We don't need to capture
Yeah.
all that, do we?
I don't know how you
Just
like the wording on
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Okay. Any support for that?
Question for clarity as a potential seconder. There doesn't have to be a risk meeting as such for our strategy to be shared with the independent. They can still have that feedback to us and
Yep.
So okay, well, that's good.
So are you happy to second the motion then? Okay, seconded by Councillor Tukapua.
So can I just clarify what the strategy was?
So that the item is laid on the table for further consideration and workshopping.
And to be brought back to council.
With the intent to bring the matter back to the council, back to council.
Be brought back to a future meeting.
Return, and to be brought back to a future council meeting. Yeah, and you can delete them and the subsequently. The item. No, that's right. So the recommendation is that the item is laid on the table to allow members and officers to undertake further consideration and workshopping on the strategy, and the item to be brought back in a future council meeting. Comfortable with that, Councillor Boyle? Councillor Tukapua? Any further debate? Councillor Brown?
Yeah, just your worship, just without wanting to make too big an issue of this, it seems to be a process. Something's gone wrong here, and what some councillors obviously, and myself included, asked to be vote on something brought up by a member that I know nothing about. I'm not sure why we're delaying this because of an issue that's been brought. There's a reason, obviously, it doesn't want to be discussed in the public forum, but it's a bit difficult because now I'm being asked to vote for something for some reason that I know nothing about. So I just wonder whether this conversation could have been had prior to the meeting, so we have more information to base our vote on. I'm just a bit lost, but I'll support it because it needs to get done, but I just want to highlight that.
Well, that really was because the first recommendation was voted down. Yeah. Okay, understood. Thank you. All right, so I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour? Councillor Boyle, Councillor Tukapua. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Guy. Okay, next item on our agenda is the economic dashboard. Welcome, Katrina and Brendan. David as well. Right, okay. While you're taking the seat, can we just move 2.1, 2.2, that the dashboard be received and recognised as not significant? Seconded by Councillor Proctor. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Firstly, David, where you go?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, councillors. It's a real privilege to be able to be joined at the table today by Katrina Mackay and Brendan Duffy, the Chief Executive and Chair of the Horowhenua Company. The Horowhenua Company is who we have a service contract with to deliver economic development services. Part of that is around providing economic data to us and also coming and reporting to Council. And so they're both here today to talk about the latest economic dashboard, which you'll note relates to the data relating to December. That does feel a little bit odd now that we're a week away from May, but they'll talk a little bit about just the timing when that information comes out and now our council cycle. But they will also try and make most of their time here and try to fill in some of the gap between the data in December and now some of the things that they're aware of as well. So I'll hand over to them both.
Thank you, David, and your worship. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and present to you. Just make a slightly levitated observation that the last time I sat in this room was in 2016 at the other end of the table. And the last time I sat at this end of the table advocating on behalf of the community was the late 1980s, early 1990s, and we tried to get an additional picture theatre. So time has moved on somewhat, so I've gone right around the circle and up back to this end. And I have to say the last hour sitting in this room makes me determined to make this presentation slightly more stimulating.
Excuse me. Excuse me. So you might be ejected if you keep that sort. So at the beginning of April of this year, the Horowhenua Trust appointed me as chair of the company. So I've only been in the role 3 weeks, and sitting next to Katrina in those 3 weeks has certainly been highly constructive and very stimulating, and I'm really excited to be privileged with having this role where we, the Horowhenua Company, have some significant responsibilities in terms of our relationship with the local authority, with you, and what it is that we can deliver into the community on our behalf, on our collective behalf. So with those few modest introductory words, I'll pass over to somebody who already knows what's going on, Katrina.
Kia ora, and thank you, Brendan, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's very nice to be able to come back and have a chat to you about the economy. I would just preface for those of you who don't know me and haven't heard me speak before, I am not an economist. Our role is to, we have a number of subscriptions to economic data. We monitor some of what economic commentators are saying, and then through a process of compilation and discussion have developed this dashboard. I've handed you out a hard copy of it because while I know that you've been provided it as part of your papers, it is designed to be read as a booklet, so it doesn't really translate especially well on screen. I've got 3 things I really wanted to touch on briefly. So first of all, I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight about the critical information that we include in the dashboard. I've also handed you a supplementary that we provided earlier this year, which was a summary of what happened in our economy during the 2022 year. That's based on data that is provided and updated annually. And then I have got a few comments, as David said, just about things that have happened in the intervening 3 or 4 months. Because the one thing I'd say, in my experience of monitoring some of this stuff and looking at the economy, the volatility that we're in at the moment is is quite unprecedented, and things. If I was here 2 weeks ago, I would have been saying some quite different things from what I'll be saying now, just in terms of what's happening at the macro level. But first of all, turning to the dashboard, this is based primarily on data that comes out from Infometrics every quarter, and it usually there is a bit of a lag. The next lot of data for the period to the end of March will be with us on the 18th of May, so there will be a March quarter update available for you at the end of May. We try not to put too much of our own spin on the data. We try to make sure that this dashboard remains really closely aligned to credible, independent sources of information. But what we do try and do on parts of it is to provide some anecdotal insight from what we're hearing from local business, and we compile a range of different views from different commentators about what the future forecasting might look like. When we were asked to develop the dashboard, we worked with council officers to identify what the key performance areas were that would be useful for you to inform some of your thinking, which is how the different sections have been compiled. And then we do, as I say, supplement it with some of the annual data. It doesn't make sense to keep giving you quarterly reports on population, for example, when that data source is only updated annually. So I don't propose to go through in any more detail at the dashboard, but of course really open to questions. I did just want to draw your attention to a couple of points in respect of the performance of the district during the 2022 calendar year. So this is the one-page sheet that I've provided you. So one of the things I think it is useful to think about is that even in 2022, which was a fairly challenging year overall in terms of the economy, our economy grew by a level that was higher than other parts of Manawatu, Whanganui, and higher than New Zealand as a whole. Well, it seems like a really positive thing. I think for those of you who've been around the table for a while, our economy tends to be a lag economy. What we will often see is things that happened in the national economy hit us a year or so later on. So while this is a really positive indication about how well we performed during COVID, I don't think that we should be regarding it as meaning that we're ahead of the game necessarily. But interestingly, again, areas where our performance was higher than the rest of the country was in the growth of business units, and that is something that has been seen around the country, where some people regarded COVID as an opportunity to rethink what they were doing and actually and establish new businesses, and that is something that's translated into Horowhenua. The next page, which gives a little bit of sort of the key stats around the region, I thought would just be useful for it. So it's always interesting, these things are always in percentages, but again, our population growth, I'm in the habit of saying we're not just planning for growth is with us, and that is different from other parts of New Zealand and other parts of Manawatu, Whanganui. We are ahead of that growth curve, and it is internal migration. It is people moving from the larger urban centres to Horowhenua. So in real terms, that was a growth of around about 500 people in the last year. I thought what was very interesting there is around the housing affordability, and this is something I know that Council has talked about and considered a lot. The Housing Affordability Index is the ratio between current house prices and mean household incomes. And as you can see there, unfortunately, we are the leader of the pack in that. You'll see I'll give you a bit more data in a moment just about some of the really quite surprising things around housing and rental affordability. What this means in real terms for us is that mortgages as a proportion of income, of mean income, is around about 43.4%. So that's pretty alarming. For New Zealand, it's about 49%. And not enough said, really, I suppose, but it's something that we need to really reiterate the focus on providing good housing stock at a price that people can afford. I did want to make a small comment about unemployment. So unemployment was at 4% during 2022. That's down from a previous high of 5.4% the previous year. So quite a significant change, which is why we've got it as a green upward arrow. In fact, should have been a green downward arrow, but we are saying that is a really good, strong result for us. I also thought it would be just interesting for council to think about some of the groups on that unemployment rate. You'll be aware that the NEETs rate for the young people not in employment, education and training has traditionally been a really high area in Horowhenua. So in 2015, we almost led the country at 25.8%. So meaning over a quarter of our young people were not in training, education or employment. That's now sitting at around about 14.5%, and in 2021 it was 18%. So we're definitely heading in the right direction, and some of the initiatives that are on the ground around getting young people transitioning well out of high school and into employment, that Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, Work and Income, HLC are working on, are beginning to have an impact. So I don't want to say any more about that. Now I've just got a couple of comments before I open for questions on things that have been happening in the last 2 or 3 months. So as I said, some of what I was going to say is a bit different now from what it would have been a couple of weeks ago. And the first one is that we got the surprise last week of the annual inflation rate dropping from 7.2% to 6.7% unexpectedly. It sounds really good and we all get excited, but what it's showing was it was about global fuel prices reducing, is my understanding. Our grocery supply cost index is still high. That's 10.3% increase in March for what suppliers charge supermarkets for goods. So there is pressure not both at the consumer end but also at the supply end. Consumer spending is something that we're hearing an awful lot about. And Retail New Zealand provided some information recently that said that almost half of businesses, about 44% of businesses, didn't achieve their sales targets during the 3 months ending March. So that's, it's showing some real tension for our retail sector. If we look at what happened in Horowhenua though, if we look at that period from January through to February, there was an increase in almost every sector in Horowhenua in consumer spending. The areas that didn't increase, as you might expect, accommodation and cafes, restaurants and takeaways, they both had a fairly minor drop. But it's really strong growth in our favourites that drive a lot of our spending. Fuel and automotive and groceries and liquor continue to be quite strong areas for consumer spending. Employment across New Zealand, across all industries, there was a very minor increase in the number of people in employment, with a bit of volatility around the sectors. What that looks like in Horowhenua is that there was a decrease of people in jobs in agriculture, but an increase in manufacturing, construction, retail and healthcare. So those, the 5 kind of what we regard as the 5 kind of key sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, construction, healthcare and education, they're remaining reasonably vibrant apart from the agriculture space. And just looking at some of the demographics of who's filling these jobs, was quite surprising actually. So the two groups that had the biggest increase of numbers in employment were the 15 to 19 year age group and the 65 plus. So we've been bookended. And just a couple of comments on housing. As I said, there's some really interesting stuff that's coming out about this. So we did a bit of a comparison about what average house prices were since 2019, just to understand the impact of COVID on house prices. So in 2019, the average house price in Horowhenua was $354,102. In 2022, it's $635,000. So that's almost an 80% increase over that COVID period. And while the average prices have come back a bit just recently, so our average prices, the national dropped around about 12.9% from last year, and we are seeing some of that flattening here too. It's where we started on a very low base, we've jumped up really high, and now we're just sort of tampering back a little bit. In March 2023, the median price here in live-in, this is just a live-in stat, $522,000, and that's up from $518,000 in February. And that was 23 homes sold in March, 15 sold in February. The other thing that's interesting is how long they're taking to sell. 89 days in February, down to 70 days in March. So there's some interest coming back into the housing sector. And again, I thought that comparative data around rental affordability is quite interesting about what happened what was pre-COVID to now. 2019, it was $299 was the average weekly rent in Horowhenua. Now it's at $435, so about a 45% increase. So just gives you some food for thought around that volatility. So some things, the upward pressure's there, but it's beginning to back off in some sectors and some parts of the economy. But we're very much looking forward to the next lot of data that we'll get in about 3 weeks or so, and being able to provide you the whole dashboard with a bit more of that balanced information. Now really open to questions and comments. Kia ora.
Thanks, Katrina. So this is a quarterly report, this is the yearly report. Okay, so I mean the differences between the two are quite stark in terms of some of those numbers, aren't they? And I suppose the first one that sticks out for me is in the quarter you show our GDP actually having gone down, but yet we've increased by 1.7%. How do I relate that to a decrease or a minus?
So the GDP did increase during December, and so that downward red arrow is, I think, showing that it was lower than the national average. So I think that I should have explained that better.
I'll come back to it. I'll let the others go first. Councillor Proctor.
I just wanted to say thanks for the information. This is really helpful. So these sort of dashboards are really useful for decision making, especially the decision making that we have coming up in the next few months as well. And I look at the reduction in the agribusiness in our area, and hopefully that helps inform some people's decision around shifting of rates and rates increases in the rural areas.
Councillor Jenny.
Thank you both for being here. And the question I wanted to focus in on was around housing. So you're probably aware that one of Council's key priorities on our plan on a page is enabling affordable housing. There's been a bit of discussion and debate around what actually affordable means and what we should use as the parameters. And so we've got our housing action plan, which talks about the multiple median, and obviously in this dashboard it talks about the housing affordability index. Are those two things the same thing, or do they mean slightly different things? Can you clarify that for me?
I can't, I'm afraid. I'll have to go away and look at that in more detail.
Following that, Katrina, do you have any idea of the split between rental and owner-occupied homes in this district? And is it changing at all?
I don't, but we have that information, so I can provide. I can compile that information, and I'll provide that through to David. That's a really good question. It'll be very interesting to see what's happening to that over time. Yeah.
Mr. Tamiha.
Thank you, guys, for the presentation. I'm like JP. I think, sorry, Councillor Proctor. I think it's a really great document, actually. And I'm actually just going to pick up on Councillor Proctor's point. Because while we can use it to identify productive land and how that's used, I also wonder about land availability. Is that something else that can be picked up on in terms of, what land is available in our district? What should that land be set aside for or used for? What land is left available to build on? And then obviously Māori land. So I'm just raising that as is that something else that could be identified in your workspace?
Kia ora. That's something I think that David and his team are doing quite a bit of work on at the moment, and we are providing some inputs into where we think there is demand, particularly around commercial and industrial land. But I think that David would be able to provide some of that information. We certainly have got, we are compiling, identifying where Māori owned land is, and that to help support some of our discussions with local iwi and hapu, to make sure that there is an understanding about how some of that land can be brought into more productivity. But David, do you want?
The most recent piece of work we've done in that space relates to the living structure plan work. So that's where we have done some housing and business land assessment essentially. And so when we get to getting in front of you and talking about the structure plan, we'll socialise that assessment work that's been done, and it starts to pick up on some of those points that Katrina made around looking at, as we grow, what sort of land space might we need for industrial, commercial and the like going forward, and that starts to influence then areas that we identify and the sizes.
Thanks, Katrina. My questions in terms of particularly residential construction. You're aware that this council's adopted the 95th percentile based on a whole lot of financial assumptions around growth. Are you picking up any data around not only Horowhenua but regionally and even nationally around a slowdown in that residential construction? And what I'm probably referring to is the increasing government requirements around liquefaction, triple glazing, higher requirements around rental properties, insulation. So increased costs all the time at a time where we're trying to create housing stock. Are you picking up anything around that?
So I don't have any data about that, but certainly anecdotally we are hearing that while within Horowhenua the commercial construction market still seems reasonably strong, the residential housing market is reducing, and investor interest in purchasing new builds to rent is reducing. So that certainly aligns with what you are suggesting, that even while new houses bought to rent have better tax treatment, they're not being sought after as an investment vehicle at the moment. The other point, I think that council again will have had some data around the number of consents that are lodged for different activities that provide some interesting things. One of the things that we've just picked up from that there does seem to be a bit of activity in the education refurbishment space at the moment, where a number of our local schools are putting efforts into increasing space. And of course, you'll all be aware of some of the commentary that we're hearing about some reasonably significant developers and construction companies going into liquidation. We haven't heard of any major concerns within the Horowhenua district around that, although a number of our construction companies are subcontractors to some of the larger builders, and that work is definitely slowing down.
Mr. Gibson. Katrina, are you, I guess based upon the economic information in here, is there anything in here that's working against some of the projects that you have on the go? And or are there opportunities that are starting, future opportunities for you that are starting to flag as a result of some of this information?
So I would say that in terms of one of the things that we're starting to see is not a reluctance for people to invest in Horowhenua, so commercial, not a reluctance for new business to come here, but perhaps a slowdown of the timeframes that they're looking to undertake that. So we are hearing that, for example, just looking at the Horowhenua Business Park, we know that some of the purchasers of that had intended to begin construction fairly shortly and have just decided just to slow it down a little bit, and rather than move or diversify up here, just to stay where they are until costs get a little bit more contained. I would say that in respect of some of our other projects, this data and what's happening within our economy just reinforces the need for us to move a bit faster on some of the things that will enable demand to be met.
It's probably not unreasonable, though, to observe that if we look backwards over the last 3 to 5 years and then look forwards, it doesn't take much to add up what's occurred and what potentially will occur, remembering that there's a hell of a lot of roading development yet to occur. So there's a very powerful signal for what's in front of us.
Councillor Proctor.
I just have a rather general, broad sort of question. Does the Horowhenua Company at any stage look at developing these reports around the Treasury's living standards, living framework, is it?
That's a very good question. And that's certainly something we did a piece of work with David and his team earlier in what might have been at the end of last year, where we're just looking at the range of data sources that are available, what's out there in the market. Do we think that we've got enough, we're getting the right kind of data? And we took it from the living standards framework, looking at what data sources are available under each of those kind of components. We came to the conclusion that there are some very good data sources that that focus on the social and cultural kind of components of the living standards, whereas the data sets that we have to really drive into that economic part of the framework. So that's what we decided, that we would continue to focus on that because that's kind of our core. But there are a range of other data sources that are available, and that can paint a broader picture around those around the framework, really.
Thank you, team. Thank you, Katrina. Look, you'll be well aware that we're in the middle of an annual planning process and trying to formulate what's ahead of us for the next little while. And this information does give us, a pretty good background in terms of hopefully making our decision making easier and more effective and efficient. So, the quicker we get that information, obviously, and I would hope before we make deliberations in the middle of June or the end of June that we might see a March quarter result that will give us an even better insight into what is going on and what's happening out there. But really appreciate the great information, and thank you. And I'm sorry, Chair, if that means you've got to come back again, but we'll put up with you if you do anyway. Yeah, I am sure you are. Keep up the good work. Thank you. We're now moving on to the organisation performance report. And again, a very comprehensive and detailed document. And so we won't be going through this page by page like we did last time, because we could be here till 6 o'clock before we decide it. But I am going to ask the group managers if they would come to the table, and if you have individual questions of any of them about anything that's contained in the report, and that does include the plan on a page, the top 10, the other areas of focus, the organisational values and primary pillars, and the financial summary. Please feel free to ask them that. We'll talk about the risk report and the statement of service standards later on individually, but for now, I'm going to ask the previous acting chief executive if she would mind introducing the report. Thank you, Jacinda.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. What I'll do is I'll introduce some of the key financial side in terms of the report, and then hand it over to questions. I thought this particular item might get quite a few questions, so I thought we'd address it first. So, in relation to the report, from a capital perspective, we're coming along okay in terms of where we're tracking so far, with 17.6 finished at the end of February. As of today, if you look at what we've completed, and that's not with the month complete yet, so there's still more to come in, but we sit at close to 23 million, so 22.7 million in terms of where we're at as of today in terms of the capital program. Talking to Daniel in terms of where we might sit at the end of the year, still a good level of comfort around coming in around the early 30s mark in terms of 32 to 35 million. So in terms of that overall program, sitting closer to 60, but in terms of the assumptions that were made for this year in terms of the budget for what we need for borrowings, that's been based on a completion rate of 35 million. So we're still tracking okay in terms of where we would expect to be for the capital side of things. In terms of the operating side of things, we are, as we've tried to highlight quite clearly in there, facing some challenges in keeping up with the budget. And when I say keeping up with the budget, I mean tracking at the level of the budget or below. So some of the things that have been favourable for us so far up to the end of February have been that we have had the success of the funding from the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs in terms of additional income, and the support money coming in from the Crown in terms of for the Three Waters. On the other side of that is, though, while we've had that income in, that is money that we are directly spending on resources, both in the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs space and in the Three Waters space to get the work done. So while the income might look higher, so is the expenditure from that side as well. In terms of why we're tracking above on the spending side, there's a few key items. They are, one, interest, which continues to be a significant issue for us. We're actively talking to our Treasury advisors regularly in terms of where our interest is tracking. It's hard to believe, but we are still one of the lower ones in terms of New Zealand's average in terms of our cost of funds, but that doesn't help the extra cost that we're having to pay at the moment in terms of interest costs. So we're about 750,000 additional so far at the end of February, and that might track as far as 1.6 million in terms of a total extra cost by the end of the year. So that's something that is being tracked carefully, both with Bancorp and with LGFA, but that's where it's looking at the moment. Standard & Poor's are in next week for their annual meeting, so if we can continue to keep the same rating, then hopefully our interest costs won't go up further. As well, something that didn't feature in the last report that we wanted to touch on, and Blair may want to add a little bit more about as well. In our regulatory space, we are tracking currently up where the forecast looks like we might be overspent up to about $1 million, so that's significant. There's a couple of key reasons why that might be where it is. Those are, one, there's some significant jobs that would have gone through the revenue stream last year and gone through the books, but the work is continuing on in this financial year. So in some places, those costs are being incurred this year, where the revenue has all been incurred last year when we had the higher revenues come in. As well, there's some work that needs to be done in the team around making sure that when we have additional consultants or people in the building to help us with resource consents, that we're making sure that all of those costs are on bill to the cost of the resource consent. So Blair's working with the finance team closely to both make sure everything is billed that should be billed, and then going forward to make sure, because we are having at the time in the economy when volumes are up and down, we need to be really diligent about making sure that when consents occur, the revenue is recorded in the year, not just when the consents occur, but also the work associated with those consents sits in the right year to match when the revenue is coming in. Normally you would say that's not going to be a big issue, but where you've got significant movements in terms of volumes, it's proving quite careful. We need to be quite careful about doing that more robustly in the future. So regulatory, that's what, you may have some more questions, but that's what's happening in that particular space. We're actively working to try and resolve and bring that number down, but we wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. The other one is in the maintenance space. So there's currently up to about 1.2 million additional maintenance happening in the infrastructure space. Now, last year, you may recall, so in the last financial year, we had some instances with the Alliance where the call about whether we did additional maintenance or whether we did capital works was a fine line in terms of what work was capital, what work was maintenance. A decision was made last year that while we didn't spend all the capital, we spent more in the maintenance space, and so that was agreed to be funded by borrowings so that it wasn't additional rates money. This financial year, some work needs to happen now, and the Waters team are already working on it to make sure they're reviewing all of the work that's gone into the maintenance spending and make sure that it's appropriately maintenance spending and not some of the capital work for renewals that needs to be done. So that's some work that's happening now, and we'll hopefully be able to give you an update at the next meeting in terms of what that picture is looking like. If some of that actually is legitimately renewal spending, then that can be transferred into the capital side of things. Equally, if we get to the end of the financial year and we haven't spent all of our maintenance budget, or we haven't spent all of our capital budget, and we've spent more of our maintenance budget, then a conversation could be had about what's the most appropriate mechanism for funding that. So interest, regulatory space, and in the maintenance space as well. There's a bit around some of the weather events and some of the work that's being needed in the roading space, in particular around maintenance. But those are some of the key reasons why we've both got some extra spending now and are under pressure to keep the spending below the budget for the end of the financial year. So that's probably enough on the finance update. Hand it over in terms of whether there are any questions.
Councillor Ross. Yeah, thanks for that. That's awesome. I guess like with the likes of probably Blair's and even Daniel's work, work like they're doing, could you just have accruals, probably not pronounced right, accruals, just so it is documented and reported properly for financial purposes?
Yep, absolutely, and we will be. Yeah, that definitely makes it easier and gives more clarity around it. So absolutely, that's the intention. Yeah.
Just send a couple of little questions. First one, on page 150 of the report, we talk about our that we're at 180% of operating income at the moment in terms of debt. Yeah, and then the table over the next page indicates that we're at close to 194, are we? I'm just trying to, is it the same thing that I should be correlating to, or is that different?
I think the other one is about total debt. Okay. So while we have our gross debt, we also have cash and some investments that help to offset that. So when we talk about it in terms of the level, the 180, it's more around the percentage that debt is net borrowings as a share of operating income.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my next question is, 2023, our debt maturity profile shows that we're going to have to pay back some considerable funds over the next. Is that mostly done now, or are we still going to have to borrow to repay that debt?
Thanks. It's a good question. So there's a couple of bits. Commercial paper is a pretty big part of that.
Right.
And that we use that up to about 16 or so, up to 20 million on a given time, because it's cheaper to borrow, but there's less certainty around being able to access it. So from a Standard & Poor's perspective, and in terms of a treasury management perspective, we've recently finalized the program in terms of setting up the debt repayment for the next financial year as well. So we've got all the borrowing in place to make sure that we're all set up for the next financial year and have good access to funds. In terms of the allocation of that between fixed and floating, though, we've kept that at not a minimum level, but within policy limits. But the advice from Bancorp and from others has been to not go too far in terms of fixing the debt because of what's happening in the market. And so we've got full access to the funds for the next, in terms of repayment for the next financial year, and have reduced the level of commercial paper a little bit so that there's more certainty around access to funding.
So I suppose the follow-up question, do you expect us to be paying more for the cost of funds over the next, is that going to level off, or is that going to keep increasing like it's showing on the?
It's probably for the next financial year, so the next 15 months, it's going to continue to be pretty volatile. For example, putting Councillor Grimstone, I'm sure we'll have some comments potentially around this one, but so for example, our cost of funds is in the high threes. Looking at a what you call a forward start swap, so it's basically saying, let's say in 15 months' time, we want to make sure we're fixing in our interest rate for a portion of our debt. We did one last week for $10 million starting in about 18 months' time. That was sitting at a rate of 3.9%. So where rates have been in the 4s and the 5s and the 6s in terms of current rates, when you're locking something in for sort of 15 to 18 months' time, we're starting to see that dropping down. So of course, all that could change, but we are hopefully seeing some reprieve in the future. But in the next year, it's still going to be pretty tricky. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions of anybody, of any of the GMs around any other activities? Councillor Tukapua.
Oh, just about that operating surplus. I think full year you expect 2.9. It's already at 2.8 with 2 months to go. Are we sure that only it's going to shift that 100,000, or might there be more? Like, really?
I think it's fair to say the tooth comb in terms of making sure that all the budgets are thoroughly reviewed, and from a forecast perspective, everybody's really happy. I wouldn't say that we're there yet in terms of saying that's what the forecast is going to be. That would be the higher end of where it's going to be, and all work is being done to see if we can bring that back.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could take you to page 145, Jacinta, and the note. I had a couple of questions on this, but some of them I can deal with offline. But under note 5B, there's a final sentence there that reads that community infrastructure additional spend of 369k, mainly due to unplanned maintenance and reserves as a result of preparation for Green Flag awards. When I read that, I was a bit concerned because it sounded like we had exceeded internal budgets to apply for some awards. So I'm keen to get Brent to talk to that just briefly. But primarily, what I'm really keen to understand from you is, what is the process internally if a budget holder wants or needs to exceed an internal budget? Like, what's the process look like in terms of a conversation with your team? Like, how are we? Because I guess from my perspective, we set budgets, we view those as a sort of a fixed envelope in which the activity should occur. And so I just want to understand what the process looks like internally, where there needs to be some exceedance of internal budgets. Well, can you talk me through that?
Sure. So, and in terms of using, for example, one of the maintenance budgets, within that maintenance budget, there will be a number of items. And for example, I know Arthur in his space carefully manages each individual item so that overall we're not exceeding. There might be ups and downs within the individual ones, but overall for those key areas of that activity, making sure that doesn't exceed it overall. In terms of the internally, if somebody is looking to exceed a budget, for example, where on a particular line item, you're able to do that if you're offsetting. But if on a monthly basis, ELT go and we review the financials, we review the forecast as well. So if somebody is to request that, myself, I would need to go to Monique and request to spend additional money because it's money that I don't have. So before we do that, either a manager would come to see one of us, or equally, we would go and see Monique to request approval for that. If we then needed to fund additional amounts, then we would be needing to have a conversation about who needs to give something up and how can we talk back. Not dissimilarly to how we need to work together around the issues in terms of the regulatory spending, the fact that that's gone over, what can we do internally to try and pull things back. That was the advice, for example, from Monique to us in terms of after having that conversation and understanding where the forecast said, look, we need to look at areas where we can pull back to help offset that additional cost that's coming in that particular place. And then come to council as part of these conversations to let you know where we're at.
Yeah, look, because I just want to provide context that I am picking on that particular note, but it's not saying I don't value that piece of work because I think it's great that we've got the green flag awards. I just wanted to understand if it means that we're going to exceed a budget, how are we coming to that decision? Why, how are we ensuring that is a priority spend where it takes us outside those budget envelopes? So that's really
that. Councillor Jennings, I can answer the question around the 369k there. In terms of the maintenance of green flags, it's a very small proportion of that 369k. The way the recreational services claim comes in to us, it comes in lump sum, and then we go through a process where we shift money out to renewals and where other budget lines. So the actual true figure, after we've gone through that process, is a lot less than that 369,000 that's indicated. So it's just a matter of the timing when that occurs.
One quick note is looking at that quickly before that overall line item. It's actually that overall area is planned to be slightly under budget by the end of the year. So just to flag that.
Councillor Proctor. I just wanted to go to page 188 and have a quick question about how everything's tracking with Waikawa Beach vehicle access report and consultation. Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Yes, so there has been some engagement with the Waikawa community around the Waikawa Beach vehicle access. Obviously, it's a very contentious topic to that community. So we have a consultant that's working alongside our Parks and Property team that is leading that piece of work. There have been meetings that have been occurring with a variety of stakeholders and partners, and when the time's right, we'll bring it back to the table for further conversation.
Sorry, you jumped ahead into the next item. It's all right. I just was wondering where we were. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, and then just a question for Daniel, which was on page 95, just about the clarifier sand. I think that's flagged there as a risk, and I wanted to understand how significant the risk is, what kind of supplies do we keep on hand, what's the lead time to procure, because it's sort of included there as something that we should be aware of, but I just didn't get a sense of how important or how much we should be across it.
It's pretty vital. Effectively, that sand is there, and that system was put in to remove the risk of boil water notices. So it effectively picks up, in those periods of heavy rain events, and picks all the bugs and the bad bits of bacteria out of the water. So really vital. If we lose the sand supply, effectively the water treatment plant is compromised. There's a supply agreement that our contractor has in place with the supplier for 40 tonnes to be held within their storage facility in Auckland. It's just, sort of some of that, has been, compromised slightly in recent weeks, and the risk has been raised again. So we're meeting with the national manager for the supplier, and we're looking to get a formal supply agreement in place in terms of having a, oversight of their BCP. So effectively, if there is a delay in shipping from that supplier, that they actually have a backup plan for that. So we're not at the point of throwing bags of sand in our hand luggage and bringing it back, but it's ensuring that there's some backup and some responsibility taken from the supplier, and we don't want that to be our risk and our problem to resolve. Yeah.
Simple. In regards to the Council Actions Monitoring Report, we've got this due date column, which pretty much always has the same due date for a number of items, and it's passed for a number of items, yet they're still green as in progress and all dandy. I assume the due date is reflective of the next update, not the completion of the project. And can we have them updated and relevant and show the previous due date when they have been changed, just for future reference? One other item of note was that we've got a few items that aren't being reported on due to the lack of the resident satisfaction survey. We didn't do one of these in 2022, is that correct? If somebody can correct me, that'd be great. Our website says we did one in 2021. We normally do them in June. We're doing a 2023 one next month. Should we put that in there? I don't know. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so we certainly did a resident satisfaction survey in 2022. Sounds like our website is out of date. Also happy to circulate that to elected members. I know that the elected members of the time, which was the previous term, they received quite a significant briefing on it. Our absolute intention is to do a resident satisfaction survey again, albeit we are changing our approach, where this idea of asking for feedback from our community one time in a year, which could depend on a whole lot of stuff, and asking customers about things that they might not use or utilise. I'll refer you to, from memory, you've had previous reports on the voice of the customer work, and so that idea that, for example, the customer satisfaction stat around building consents, that doesn't necessarily need to go as part of a one big schwab resident satisfaction survey. What good would look like is that our automated Ask Nicely software goes to every customer at the point in time in which they're receiving the service from council and giving us that feedback. So look, we'll, as an action, and hopefully we can capture this in the minutes, Grayson, note some work to do another briefing for council around that work, but also make sure that that is reflected in here.
Yeah, no, happy with that response and agree completely. There's just a few items like satisfaction of aquatics where we can't report because we haven't done a survey. I'm pretty sure we could do something to report on those.
Sorry, I'll try to make myself clearer next time I introduce a topic that we'll talk about these items when they come up. We are only talking, we haven't got to the statement of service statement performance SSPs yet. So if you've got any questions, just hold off for those. We're talking the organisational report, including the top 10 and our council plan on a page things first. Councillor Jennings.
Well, Mr. Mayor, if you're happy, I'll cover off my last two things on my questions. So on page 56, there's reference to a landscaper wanting to lease part of the Levin depot. And I'm sure Councillor Tukapua will probably have some commentary on this, but my reaction to that was keen to just understand a little bit more about that, because there was some discussion previously around the previous council table around the strategic importance and value of the depot, how it connects into landfill-related decisions. And then I've got one further question just about the Horowhenua Kapiti Rugby Football Union Club.
Thank you, Councillor Jennings. So in terms of the landscaper conversation, that's very, very early on in the piece, so we haven't actually progressed that much further. We need to understand what that landscaper is wanting. Alongside that, obviously, as you've touched on, the future of the depot is another important discussion which needs to factor into that conversation. So at this stage, I can't update you a lot more other than it's very early on in the conversation.
And so then, the question about the rugby club was, there's reference to it on page 57, which is talking about their timeline for development. But then there's also later in the report in the infrastructure space, so I think it's on page 97 and 99, there's discussions around the Salisbury Street stormwater upgrades, which also go through part of the domain grounds or alongside the domain grounds. And obviously one of the things that we're going to be considering as part of the long-term plan proper next year is around potential development of the aquatic centre space there. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of, do these things interconnect? Do they need to interconnect? And how are we sort of making sure that we're not duplicating processes around them?
In terms of the building itself and any future work at Live-in Aquatic Centre, part of the MOU that we have with HKRFU is the fact that it does need to interconnect with whatever plans may be in the future, and if it can't, part of the in the MOU is the ability to relocate the premises. So Corey's been involved in the conversations from a very early stage regarding the Aquatic Centre, so we'll continue the conversation with him as we move through, whatever that may look like.
In terms of the stormwater, in simple terms, the water comes through from the main street, through the Live-in Mall premises, across the car park, and currently goes into a system linked with the domain and the Aquatic Centre that we know is in poor condition and undersized. So the approach is to effectively divert that water along Bath Street, so by the Picture Theatre, down into the trunk main. So it ends up there by virtue of going through the system, but we know that it needs to be a certain size pipe, which is a 600 diameter, not a 300. So the plan is to simply install that and then take the pressure off that other system whilst those future decisions are made, and it might result in a different layout.
Councillor Breen.
Yeah, that question for Dan, I think, probably. Page 157 of the report, or 112 of the risk report, around the trolley lines, trolley cables there. Foxton removal, which is a great piece of work. Do we know roughly what any costs are, or that you may not say it publicly, and are we going to move forward with cost recovery?
Yeah, there's certainly a mechanism. I won't go into the full detail of costs, but they're probably not as significant as everyone expected. It was a couple of days' work to turn up and drop the lines. So there is a legal process that we are working with the owner of the trolley lines around that cost recovery mechanism, and that could mean that the material sold as scrap, and certainly high value copper. So there is a recovery available directly from the materials. Subsequent to that, depending on what that remaining value is, and legal costs that we are actually entitled to, would be a likely decision of council. So it would be a subsequent update as to the course of action if there was a residual amount, whether it was worth pursuing that once we recover costs through the scrap value.
You preempted my next question, so thank you.
Mr. Grimstein.
Lee, for you, I sort of note on the report we've got lodgements down, inspections up, and there's a reference to some of the overspend being
the use of contractors to complete some of that work. So I'm just keen to understand that if I was a builder, am I yet seeing an improvement in that consenting process, or are we're still working towards seeing an improvement in that end-to-end process from a builder perspective?
Probably a couple of questions there. The differential, I guess, in the inspections versus the inbound consenting is a little bit what Jacinta was alluding to earlier. So the inspections and that process obviously follow building consents, which can be sort of 9 months prior. So that's that sort of lag in that inspection volume. The demand inbound is declining, and we are getting a bit more balance in the front end there, so they should start to see an improvement in those numbers at the front end. But again, it's a bit of a lag measure, so it'll take a bit of time to recover. But certainly on the building consent side, you should start to see improvement, definitely. On the resource consent side, and talking about using contractors to do the work, really where it hits us is at the margin. So it's not so much additional cost, because that cost should be recovered, but from an invoicing perspective, we have a bit of a lag there on our side too, which we're trying to fix. So that gives rise to some of that result. But yeah, from a resource consenting side, we're still struggling to get resource consenting resource. It shouldn't technically impact the timing, so we need to do more work around our accountability internally in terms of being across those, having good visibility around what's happening in the consenting space and performing to it. So there's a lot of work going on in that space. But yeah, I do note, and I have talked about it before, I think generally in councils there's limited visibility of that performance at the back end in terms of timing around consent. So we're really trying to ramp that up.
Following on from that, Blair, I mean, the company's just given us some pretty big figures that our number of consents is up 8.6% for the year. If we go and publish that information to the community, which doesn't reflect what's in the report, already we've seen since the end of December, say, quite a significant, I know this is the calendar year, so it's probably the early first 6 months that were the big numbers, but if that gets released in terms of, people might get the wrong impression that we're in fact still in some significant growth in consenting, but it's not the reality that's happening at the moment, is it?
No, and I didn't jump in earlier. I guess anecdotally what I'm hearing out there is there's some large companies around who have laid off a significant, I'd say significant, I've only heard of two, and it's 50 people have been laid off in that building space. So there's a bit of talk about people shutting up shop, builders shutting up shop and hunkering down for the winter per se, which is a little bit what I would have anticipated. I mean, with interest rates going the way they have, demand going the way it has, then, and with an election period in October, you'd expect it to be, my anticipated view is that it's going to be pretty quiet until Christmas, and after October you've got Christmas, so, you'd expect to bounce back next year, but yeah, I think depending on what that time frame is for that reporting, Bernie, I think it's where those, like you point out, it's where those timing points are, which will determine what the numbers say. So there's probably more. It's got more of the past in it, that number. Whereas I think if you look to the future, it's continue to decline.
I suppose my next question is to David then, in terms of trying to adopt an annual plan. And Ross has already alluded to the 95th percentile. When are we going to see some projected population growth figures?
So we've had that work undertaken earlier this year, and so that will be coming to you very soon as part of the LTP proper. So that would be the appropriate time to do any recalibration or resetting of your forecasting assumptions around that. I think, and we'll have a discussion at that time around how much you may react to what you're seeing at the moment, given that these things are over a long run.
Thank you all. Yes, certainly.
So just before the team leave, we're sure that you love reading these reports as much as we like writing them. One of the conversations we've had within the organisation is to seek your advice and hopefully support as elected members from shifting to having this full report every 6 weeks to having it every 12 weeks. So it would come bi-monthly or every second council meeting. And then in the interim, in the intermediate time, we would have a dashboard of some form that would kind of give you high-level indicators, particularly around some of the financial stuff, because that feels really important. But is a lot of resource to put the report together, and I think it proves its weight because it means as elected members you're far more informed, but also as an organisation we're taking the time to reflect and really understand how everything is moving together. But I'm keen to hear elected members' perspectives on shifting this particular report from every 6 weeks to every 12 weeks.
Councillor,
Yeah, I support that, but I would like to see the financials monthly.
6 weekly. Yeah. Councillor Denning.
Yeah, support that view. One thing I do think we need to implement alongside this is that whole idea of like a tracking system of elected member questions, because there are, like, for example, there are a whole lot of questions arising out of the report that I haven't asked today in this meeting because I don't want to slow things down, and it's not time critical in terms of getting those responses today, but and it's not the kind of thing that you expect the business to turn around in 24 hours either. So, like, that whole idea of being able to submit a question and either request a meeting or just an email reply, and then having that visible to all the other elected members as well, is something that I think might also just reduce the need to have this 6 weekly.
So the really good news, Councillor Jennings, is we have that. We just might not have told you about it. So within the organisation, we have a fancy tracker sheet that has all the actions that come out of whether it be an email or a comment, and to make sure that we're tracking whether we've responded to an elected member or not. And I'm pretty sure it's in your portal. We just might not have shown you. So that is an action for us to follow up on.
So, Councillor Tamiya.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to, before the team leave, just thank them for the report. I actually really like the report, even though I know there's a heap of work that goes into it. But it really captures the great work that is going on out there, and you can see it when you're moving around the community. And I was also just going to note, in that latest LG report, just citing that, our Green Flag Awards are in there. That's, just wanted to thank the team for getting us in the spotlight again. So, well done.
Congratulations, Councillor Tamihana, on being the first one that's ever said to me that they read that magazine, because I pointed that out to Sue the other day, and she hadn't seen it. So congratulations. Good to see that it is being read and recommended reading for everybody else, actually. So I can take it that there's general consensus that what the Chief Executive is proposing, we actually do. Yeah, we're sitting on ahead, so yes, thank you. Okay, so now let's move on to the risk report, and we've already had one question from that, so is there any further question on that? And the standard of service performance, SSPs, as well. We might have been a bit, Councillor Tamihana, we might have been a bit premature in letting the GMs go.
No, I was just going to, in the SSP, I've lost the page, I'm sorry, but it was actually around Lagoima. I just noticed how the Lagoima numbers are quite high. So I suppose the question for me around that was, where am I? So what level, when does a flag raise enough that a Lagoima issue is brought back to council? So that's, because I don't know what Lagoima requests are coming in, I have no idea. But I think it would be handy if we had an idea, because that might help us in some of the decisions we make. So thank you.
Through you, Worship. So I will have it sent out to you this afternoon. But on our website, we have a page dedicated to Lagoimas. So every Lagoima request we get and the response is publicly made available. So the basis that not only the person that's asking for that information, but given we're providing that information, it's publicly available. When would it be framed to elected members, or something escalated to elected members? Probably where there's a dispute, where we might have withheld information under the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act, and the requester of that information isn't happy, and they obviously at all times can escalate that to the Ombudsman. So probably when the Ombudsman is interested in a particular request. The other occasion where I think we would escalate it to elected members is where we were concerned about the time we were spending on particular Lagoima requests. So sometimes, in the past, there's particular national organisations that often get kind of labelled as, because if you make an individual request, you treat that as an individual request. And so instead of asking 120 questions at a time, they could ask 120 separate requests so that they can avoid having to pay for our time. So if we were concerned about the impact of vexatious requesters, but yeah, certainly there are a lot of information requests. I think what I'd comment on is my observation is that we're trying really hard to shift the dial on the idea of every time someone asks us for information, that doesn't need to be a Lagoima. And that's a bit of a cultural shift that we're going through, where there has been kind of a period of time where everything has been treated as a Lagoima, where actually when someone asks information, we can just give it to them. So yeah, I think that will take some time to settle though.
Councillor Jennings. Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just the only question I had on the SSP was on page 184, where there's a reference to the firefighting standards. And I know it's a conversation we've had before about as part of our growth trajectory in terms of those encouraging and promoting multi-storey commercial and residential dwellings and large buildings. And so just making sure that we are able to supply the level of pressure and level of quantity that's needed, so that we're not, pushing against that development ambition. And so, just wanting to flag that, keen to make sure that that's on our radar in terms of the discussion around what our and I guess how that links into potential Three Waters spend that we're going to have to now think about in the first 2 years potentially of the LTP.
Do you want to respond to that, Blair? Thanks, Councillor Jennings. There's quite a bit of work going on in that space at present. So we have lodged a risk position in the risk register around the firefighting activity. So we're doing a bit of work now to understand the sort of the cross-plan complexities of that and how where we sit. We won't necessarily be able to comply with the highest levels of firefighting requirements, but we want to be very clear as to what we can do and then leave the residual risk or resolution up to those people doing the builds. So at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to insurance. At the end, from a building perspective, the Building Act makes sure people get out. The rest is with the building owner around insurance risk. So we've started a bit of a statement that we can probably share with you in the risk register, and we are actively working on tidying that up so there's at least absolute clarity as to what we can do going forward.
Deputy Mayor Allen.
Just referring to page 162, 163 as an example of a red lit area, CF14, could we, where there is a off-track identified anywhere, there be an explanation as to why?
Noted, and yes.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the resolution actions monitoring report on 8.3. I'll move 2.1, 2.2 that the report be received. Seconded by Councillor Horowhenua. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Any questions or clarifications sought on that report? We've already had one, obviously. We'll ensure that goes in that part of the notes rather than the other ones. And we've dealt with 9.1, 9.2, so that brings us to item 10, which is the exclusion of the public under the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act 1987. We will be excluding the public from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, which include C1, Crown Infrastructure Partners, C2, Grounds Maintenance Procurement, and C3, Civic Building Refit. Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Jennings, second to Councillor Olsen. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, John. Thank you to those